judge came into the courthouse and said, into the courtroom and said that he was getting ready to excuse the jury and left the courtroom, came back a little later than expected, and said he just received news that there was a verdict. There was a gasp, an audible gasp, several people just stunned that this verdict was happening today. A few minutes later, around 5 o'clock, the jury walked back into that courtroom, walking right past Donald Trump, not even looking at him. Not a single one of them cast any eye contact upon him. Walked into that box. At 5:03, they started reading the verdict. Within 3 minutes or 4 minutes, Donald Trump had been a convicted felon. Trump himself was quiet, impassive throughout the verdict, as he had been warned to be by the judge. The judge had told everyone to sort of maintain their decorum during the verdict.
Okay, so absolute chaos just erupted in a federal courtroom. And I mean, absolute chaos. A judge just unsealed Trump's verdict. The verdict that's been kept secret. The verdict that Trump's lawyers have been fighting tooth and nail to keep hidden. And when the judge read it out loud in open court, when everyone heard what was actually in there, the courtroom exploded gasps, shouting, Trump's lawyers looking absolutely horrified, and immediately within minutes, members of Congress are calling for Trump's arrest. They're saying this verdict exposes crimes that demand immediate detention, that Trump needs to be taken into custody right now. This is wild because we've known Trump was convicted. We've known there was a verdict, but the specific details, the actual findings, the evidence the jury relied on, all of that has been sealed, hidden from public view, while Trump's legal team fought to keep it secret. And now it's out. Now everyone can see what the jury actually found. And it's worse than anyone expected. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. The judge who unsealed this wasn't playing games. They called out Trump's lawyers for intentional deception. They rebuked Trump's claims of being above the law. They said that Trump and his legal team have been manipulating the system, hiding evidence, misleading the court, and they've had enough. So they unsealed the verdict, made it public, forced everyone to confront what the jury actually found when they convicted Trump, and the revelations are devastating. We're talking about admissions Trump made that directly contradict his public statements. We're talking about evidence showing Trump knew exactly what he was doing when he committed the crimes he's been convicted of. We're talking about a pattern of behavior that shows criminal intent, knowledge, deliberate wrongdoing, not mistakes, not misunderstandings, actual crimes committed knowingly and willfully. Political analysts are calling this a turning point. They're saying this unsealed verdict changes everything because now there's no ambiguity, no way for Trump to claim he was confused or misled or acting in good faith. The verdict spells it all out, and it's going to influence every other case Trump is facing. Every judge hearing Trump's cases is going to see this verdict. They're going to see what a jury found when they actually heard all the evidence. They're going to see Trump's admissions, his knowledge, his intent, and that's going to affect how they handle their cases. It creates precedent. It establishes facts that other courts can rely on. It makes it much harder for Trump to claim innocence or ignorance in other contexts. The courtroom scene itself was extraordinary. Witnesses described visible shock. Trump's lawyers were scrambling. They clearly weren't expecting the judge to unseal this. They thought they'd successfully kept it hidden. They thought they could continue fighting to keep the details secret while Trump appealed. But the judge said no. The public has a right to know what this verdict actually says. The American people deserve to see what a jury found when they convicted their president. Transparency matters, justice matters, and we're not going to let you hide the truth anymore. And when the judge started reading the verdict, when the specific findings started coming out, you could hear gasps throughout the courtroom. People couldn't believe what they were hearing because Trump has been claiming innocence. He's been saying he did nothing wrong. He's been calling this a witch hunt and political persecution. But the verdict shows that's all lies. The jury found, based on evidence presented at trial, that Trump knew what he was doing, that he acted with criminal intent, that he tried to cover up his crimes, that he lied repeatedly. All of that is now in the public record. All of that is now something Trump can't deny or spin away. Congressional response has been immediate and intense. Democrats are calling for Trump's arrest. They're saying this verdict proves Trump is a threat, that he cannot be allowed to remain free while his appeals proceed. that the evidence of his crimes is so overwhelming, so clear, that he needs to be detained immediately. But it's not just Democrats. Some Republicans are also expressing shock at what's in the verdict. They're not calling for arrest yet, but they're acknowledging that the findings are serious, that the evidence is damaging, that Trump's legal situation is much worse than they realized. And here's what's really significant. This unsealed verdict is going to follow Trump everywhere. Every court appearance, every appeal, every new case, prosecutors in other jurisdictions are going to read this verdict. They're going to see what evidence convinced a jury to convict. They're going to use that information in their own cases. Defense lawyers in other cases are going to have a much harder time defending Trump because this verdict establishes so many damaging facts. Judges are going to be less sympathetic to Trump's claims because they'll see that another jury already rejected those claims. The unsealing doesn't just affect this one case, it affects Trump's entire legal future. Trump's team is scrambling right now. They're trying to figure out damage control. They're trying to spin this. They're probably filing emergency motions to reseal the verdict or limit its impact. But it's too late. The cat's out of the bag. The verdict is public. Everyone knows what the jury found, and that knowledge changes everything. This is the moment Trump's legal defenses start crumbling completely. All right, so let's dig into exactly what was in this unsealed verdict and why it's so devastating to Trump's legal position and political future. The verdict wasn't just a simple guilty finding on specific charges. It included detailed findings of fact, specific conclusions about what Trump knew, what he intended, what actions he took, and those details are what make this so damaging. First, the verdict includes what sources are describing as shocking admissions. These are statements Trump made, either in testimony or in recorded conversations, where he acknowledged facts that completely undermine his public defense. For example, Trump has publicly claimed he didn't know about certain illegal activities, but the verdict apparently includes evidence of Trump saying in private conversations that he was aware of those activities. That's perjury if he testified differently in court. That's proof of lying to the public if he said something different in interviews. Either way, it's devastating. The verdict also apparently includes findings about Trump's intent. Criminal convictions often require proving that the defendant acted knowingly and willfully, that they intended to break the law, not that they made an honest mistake. Trump's defense has always been that he didn't intend to do anything wrong, that he was following advice from lawyers, that he genuinely believed his actions were legal. But the verdict includes specific findings that the jury didn't believe that defense, that based on the evidence presented, they concluded Trump knew what he was doing was wrong, that he acted with criminal intent, that he took deliberate steps to hide his illegal conduct. Those findings destroy Trump's main defense strategy. He can't claim ignorance anymore. A jury has already found, based on extensive evidence, that he knew exactly what he was doing. The verdict also includes findings about Trump's efforts to obstruct justice and cover up his crimes. Apparently, there's evidence that Trump tried to hide documents, that he instructed others to lie, that he created false records to mislead investigators. All of this shows consciousness of guilt. It shows Trump knew he'd done something wrong and was trying to avoid getting caught. That's extremely damaging because it's one thing to commit a crime without realizing it. It's another thing entirely to commit a crime and then actively try to cover it up. The cover-up proves you knew it was wrong. Now, Trump's lawyers have been fighting desperately to keep this verdict sealed. They've argued that making it public would prejudice other cases Trump is facing, that it would make it impossible for him to get a fair trial elsewhere because potential jurors would know about this verdict. They've claimed that the specific details include sensitive information that shouldn't be public. They've used every legal argument they could think of to keep this sealed. And for a while, it worked. The verdict has been under seal for weeks or months, but the judge finally said enough. The public interest in transparency outweighs Trump's interest in keeping his crimes hidden. The American people have a right to know what their president has been convicted of. Justice cannot be done in secret, so the judge unsealed it. And Trump's lawyers were clearly blindsided. They weren't expecting the judge to act so decisively. They thought they had more time to prepare, more time to spin the narrative, more time to file appeals and protective orders. But the judge moved quickly, made the unsealing happen before Trump's team could react, and now the damage is done. The courtroom reaction tells you how shocking the verdict's contents are. These are lawyers, judges, reporters who've seen a lot, who are used to dramatic legal moments, and they were gasping. They were visibly shocked by what they were hearing. That suggests the verdict contains information that's even worse than what the public already knew. Remember, we knew Trump was convicted. We knew the basic charges. But apparently, the specific findings, the detailed evidence, the actual words Trump used in his admissions, all of that is more damaging than anyone realized. It's one thing to know Trump was convicted of falsifying business records. It's another thing to hear specific quotes where Trump acknowledged he was falsifying records to hide illegal activity. The latter is much more damaging. It's concrete, it's specific, it's impossible to deny or explain away. The judge's rebuke of Trump's lawyers is also significant. The judge accused them of intentional deception, of misleading the court, of trying to hide evidence and manipulate the legal system. That's serious. That's the kind of accusation that can get lawyers sanctioned or even disbarred, and it suggests the judge has been watching Trump's legal team closely, has seen their pattern of obstructive tactics, has had enough of their games, and is now imposing consequences. The judge specifically called out Trump's claims of being above the law, said that nobody is above the law in America, that Trump's position as president doesn't exempt him from accountability, that justice applies equally to everyone. That language is important because it directly contradicts Trump's entire legal strategy. Trump has been arguing that presidents have special protections, that they can't be prosecuted like ordinary citizens, that their position requires different treatment. And this judge just said, no, that's wrong. You're subject to the same laws as everyone else. That's a powerful statement, and it's going to be cited in every other case Trump faces. Every prosecutor dealing with Trump is going to quote this judge's finding that Trump is not above the law. Congressional calls for Trump's arrest are based on what's in the unsealed verdict. Members of Congress have now seen the specific findings. They've seen Trump's admissions. They've seen the evidence of cover-up and obstruction. And they're saying this is too serious. Trump cannot be allowed to remain free while he appeals. He's a flight risk. He's a danger to the administration of justice. He needs to be detained immediately. Now, whether Trump will actually be arrested is a different question. That's up to the judge handling sentencing. But the political pressure is mounting. The evidence is public. The calls for detention are getting louder. And Trump's legal team is running out of arguments for why he should remain free. The unsealed verdict is also going to affect Trump's other legal cases. Prosecutors in Georgia, in the January 6th federal case, in the classified documents case, they're all reading this verdict right now. They're seeing what evidence convinced a jury to convict Trump. They're seeing what arguments worked and what didn't. And they're going to use that information. They're going to cite this verdict in their own cases. They're going to argue that facts established in this verdict should be accepted in other cases, that Trump's admissions here are relevant elsewhere, that the pattern of behavior shown here proves similar behavior in other contexts. This verdict becomes ammunition for every prosecutor going after Trump. Defense-wise, Trump's lawyers now have a much harder job because they can't claim Trump is innocent when a jury has already found him guilty. They can't claim he didn't know what he was doing when this verdict specifically finds he acted knowingly. They can't claim he's being persecuted when the evidence shows he committed actual crimes. Every defense strategy they might want to use in other cases is undermined by what's in this unsealed verdict. Judges in other cases are going to be less sympathetic to Trump's arguments because they'll see that another judge and jury already rejected those arguments, that Trump already had his day in court, that he was found guilty based on overwhelming evidence. Why should they give him special treatment or extra deference? They shouldn't, and they probably won't. Public opinion is also being shaped by this unsealing. Trump's supporters have been able to claim that he was railroaded, that the prosecution was unfair, that there wasn't real evidence of crimes. But now the verdict is public. Now anyone can read what the jury found. Now the specific evidence and admissions are available for everyone to see. That makes it much harder to claim Trump is innocent, much harder to maintain that this is all political persecution. The facts are out there, the evidence is available, and it's damning. Media coverage of the unsealing has been intense. Every major news outlet is covering this. They're analyzing the verdict. They're explaining what the findings mean. They're interviewing legal experts who are all saying the same thing. This is devastating for Trump. This changes his legal situation dramatically. This makes conviction in other cases much more likely. The sustained media attention keeps this story alive, keeps it in the public consciousness, makes it impossible for Trump to change the subject or distract people with other issues. Trump's political brand is also taking a huge hit. He's built his entire persona around being a winner, being smart, being someone who beats the system. But this unsealed verdict shows him as a criminal who got caught, as someone who lied and tried to cover it up, as someone who a jury found guilty based on clear evidence. That's not the image Trump wants to project. That's not what his supporters thought they were getting. And while his hardcore base might stick with him anyway, persuadable voters are going to see this verdict and question whether they want a convicted criminal as president. Okay, so let's break down what this unsealed verdict means for Trump's immediate future and his long-term legal jeopardy. Point 1. The unsealing of the verdict eliminates Trump's ability to control the narrative about his conviction. Up until now, Trump and his lawyers have been able to spin the conviction however they want. They've claimed it was a rigged trial, that the charges were bogus, that there was no real evidence. And because the specific findings were sealed, they could say whatever they wanted without being contradicted by the actual verdict. But now the verdict is public. Now everyone can see exactly what the jury found, what evidence they relied on, what conclusions they reached. Trump can't lie about it anymore. He can't claim things the verdict explicitly contradicts. The public record now includes detailed findings that prove Trump committed crimes knowingly and intentionally. That's a game changer. That eliminates Trump's main defense strategy of simply denying everything. Point 2. The shocking admissions included in the verdict provide concrete evidence that will be used against Trump in every other case he faces. These admissions are apparently statements Trump made where he acknowledged facts that prove he knew what he was doing was illegal. Those admissions are now part of the public record. Prosecutors in other jurisdictions can cite them. They can introduce them as evidence in other trials. They can argue that Trump's own words prove his guilt. Defense lawyers in other cases are going to have a much harder time arguing. Trump didn't know his actions were illegal when this verdict includes Trump's own admissions that he knew. This creates a domino effect. One conviction becomes evidence supporting other convictions. One set of admissions undermines defenses. In other cases, Trump's legal situation compounds. Gets worse with each case. Rather than treating each case separately, they all start to reinforce each other. Point 3, the judge's finding that Trump is not above the law establishes a precedent that will be cited in every future Trump case. Judges love precedent. They like being able to point to what other judges have said and done in similar situations. And now there's a clear judicial finding that Trump's position as president doesn't exempt him from normal criminal prosecution and accountability. Every prosecutor going after Trump is going to cite that finding. Every time Trump's lawyers argue he deserves special treatment because of his position, prosecutors are going to quote this judge saying he's not above the law. That makes it much harder for Trump to claim special protections, much harder to argue he shouldn't be treated like any other criminal defendant. The precedent is established. Trump is subject to the same laws and the same judicial processes as everyone else. Point 4. Congressional calls for Trump's arrest create political momentum toward detention that Trump's legal team will struggle to resist. Right now, Trump is free while he appeals his conviction. That's normal for most defendants. But the unsealed verdict is so damaging, shows such clear evidence of crimes and cover-up, that members of Congress are saying he shouldn't remain free. They're arguing he's a flight risk, that he might obstruct justice further, that he poses a danger to the integrity of the legal system. And while Congress doesn't directly control whether Trump gets detained, their public pressure matters. It influences public opinion. It puts pressure on judges. It creates a political environment where detaining Trump seems more reasonable and necessary. Trump's lawyers are going to fight detention. They're going to argue it's unnecessary, that Trump hasn't fled, that he's complying with court orders. But the unsealed verdict makes those arguments much weaker, because it shows Trump has lied before, has tried to cover up crimes, has obstructed justice. Why should anyone trust him to behave properly now? Point 5. The public exposure of Trump's crimes through this unsealed verdict fundamentally changes the 2026 political landscape. We're heading into midterm elections. And now every voter can see detailed findings from a jury about Trump's criminal conduct. They can read Trump's admissions. They can see the evidence of his cover-up that's going to affect how people vote. Democrats are going to hammer this relentlessly. They're going to run ads quoting from the verdict. They're going to remind voters that Trump is a convicted criminal. They're going to argue that Republicans who support Trump are supporting a criminal. Some Republican candidates are going to distance themselves from Trump. They're going to try to avoid being tied to a president who's been proven to be a criminal. Others are going to double down and defend Trump. But either way, the unsealed verdict becomes a central issue in the campaign. And that's bad for Republicans. Because most Americans don't want to support criminals. Most Americans think people who commit crimes should face consequences. The unsealed verdict makes it impossible to ignore Trump's criminality. So, what's the bottom line here? A federal judge unsealed Trump's verdict. The courtroom erupted in shock when the details were revealed. The verdict includes damning admissions from Trump's specific findings that he acted knowingly and intentionally, evidence of cover-up and obstruction. The judge rebuked Trump's lawyers for intentional deception, called out Trump's claims of being above the law, and made the whole thing public despite Trump's desperate attempts to keep it sealed. The immediate consequences are devastating congressional calls for Trump's arrest. Media coverage of the shocking details, public exposure of evidence that proves Trump committed crimes, Trump's legal team scrambling to do damage control, political analysts calling this a turning point. The long-term consequences are even worse. This verdict will be used against Trump in every other case he faces. Prosecutors now have concrete evidence and admissions to work with. Judges now have precedent for treating Trump like any other criminal defendant. Trump's political brand is damaged. His legal defenses are undermined. His path to prison is clearer than ever. This unsealing represents the moment when Trump's legal troubles became undeniable and inescapable. He can't hide behind sealed records anymore. He can't control the narrative. He can't claim innocence when a jury's findings prove his guilt. The American people now know in specific detail what Trump did, what he knew, how he tried to cover it up. And they know it not because of media speculation or political accusations, but because a jury heard all the evidence and reached conclusions that are now part of the public record. That's powerful. That's the kind of thing that changes history. Trump's presidency will forever be defined by this moment, the moment when the truth came out, when the verdict was unsealed, when the courtroom erupted in shock at just how guilty Trump really is, and when the calls for his arrest began in earnest. This is Trump's path to prison being exposed. This is the beginning of the end of his ability to avoid accountability. This is justice, finally, starting to catch up with someone who thought he was above the law. The judge made clear that nobody is above the law in America, that Trump's position doesn't protect him from accountability, that crimes have consequences regardless of who commits them. And now Trump is facing those consequences. The verdict is public, the evidence is clear, the admissions are damning, and the calls for his detention are growing louder. Trump's legal team is out of tricks. They couldn't keep the verdict sealed. They can't explain away Trump's admissions. They can't argue he didn't know what he was doing when the verdict specifically finds he acted knowingly. They're scrambling. They're desperate. And they're losing. This unsealed verdict might be the single most damaging moment in Trump's entire legal saga, because it takes everything out of the realm of speculation and into the realm of established fact. A jury found these things. A judge unsealed them. The public now knows the truth. And that truth is devastating. Trump is a criminal. He knew what he was doing. He tried to cover it up, and now he's going to face the consequences. That's the story. That's what the unsealed verdict proves. And that's why the courtroom erupted in shock when the details were revealed.